How does mental health affect family and relationships? Here at Life in Your Terms, we have a fundamental belief that everything within your life affects one another. So this is just another one of those pieces where your mental health affects your relationships a lot, and you might not even know it. So today in this video, I plan to show you and walk you through how mental health affects your relationships, and then also how to go about fixing this so that you can have really great mental health and have great relationships as a result. With that being said, my name is Richardson. I'm a coach here at Life in Your Terms, and I make these videos to help pass on my experience and pass on my knowledge so you can learn these things quicker than I ever could. Now, as someone who's personally struggled with mental health a lot in the past, I feel like I can be able to show you guys how this affected my relationships and then how I went about fixing this and how you can go about fixing this. So I promise you by the end of this video, you'll have a much better understanding about how these things are interconnected and then how to fix them. So first of all, let's start out about defining mental health. I know you guys have, I'm sure that word has been thrown around, you're aware of it, but what is it and how is it integrated in our lives? Well, the way I see mental health is it affects how we think, feel, and act. So it's a crucial part of our overall well-being in terms of how we think, feel, and act. Now, with this being said, it is not an excuse for how we think, feel, and act. I think in modern day society, a lot of people use mental health as an excuse, and I totally understand why. It's heavy stuff, but I don't think it's an excuse for how you think, feel, and act. I have sympathy and empathy for everybody out there struggling with it, but it's no excuse. So if it's how we think, feel, and act, it only makes sense that it's interconnected with every single piece of our lives, especially our relationships. Because how you think influences what you think about your relationships. How you feel and your emotions will influence how you act within your relationships. So it only makes sense that it's all interconnected and related. And I think it's actually probably most interconnected with relationships. It's also interconnected with a bunch of other areas, and that's why I encourage you to take the balance wheel in the description below, because that can really help you lay out what areas may it be affecting in a positive or a negative way. Because in the balance wheel, it's going to show your professional, your relationships, your health, and then your resources. And you can see how all of those areas are interconnected. And maybe if your mental health is 4 out of 10, maybe that's affecting your professional life, or maybe it's affecting your family and your relationships, and maybe your relationship with yourself. So the second piece is, how does it actually affect these relationships? Chris, you've been telling me that it affects them in a grand way, but how? Well, the first piece of it is going to be communication. It's really going to affect the communication between parties of the relationship, because there's maybe some emotional barriers that are then set. Because if someone has poor mental health, well, that's going to, again, go upon how they feel. So they're going to set up emotional barriers to not communicate that thing with their actions. They're not going to want to communicate. Those emotional barriers can be hard to overcome. This can be a family relationship. This can be a partnership. This can be a relationship with yourself. You're setting up emotional barriers where you don't want to be open with yourself and really attack the reason that you're feeling this way. It can be in a business context where someone is having, super stressed out, super anxious, and they put up these emotional barriers to not truly communicate, which then hinders the progress of the business. So emotional barriers is going to be the first piece of communication. On top of emotional barriers, you also will see increased conflict. Because if it affects how we think and feel, it will affect how we act. So you're going to see increased conflict typically because of these heightened emotions. And maybe mental health sometimes can reflect as not much as of a control over your emotions, which is totally understandable. So that can show itself and display itself within conflict. Now, on top of conflict, you may also see a reduction in communication quality, especially in a family environment. When I was struggling with my mental health, I was like 17, and I can attest that it did reduce my communication habits with my parents, with my friends, all that stuff. You tend to isolate when you're having mental health issues. So that can be some of those communications piece, emotional barriers, sometimes increased conflict, and a reduction typically in communication. Now, on top of that, another piece of how mental health affects family and relationships is the overall well-being of the relationship itself. You may have some emotional strain because the person struggling with mental health has their own battles to fight, and so if you get those battles, it may cause some emotional strain within the relationship. On top of emotional strain, you may see some physical health impact. If you're really stressed, you're really anxious, you know that you feel fatigued, you feel tired, you don't feel as good, and that's the same thing if you're struggling with mental health. And on top of that physical health impact, there is also a dynamic change within the family or the relationships. There may be shifting roles. This could be in a business context. This again can be in a partnership. This can be within a family. You may see these shifting roles within the relationships because the person with mental health may be breaking down. And it's not an excuse for that, but that may be happening. And I'm gonna get into how to fix that in a little bit and how you can help that person potentially. Now, on top of the shifting roles and responsibilities, you may see some resentment build. If you have a reduced amount of communication, increased conflict, it's only natural to see resentment between two parties, and that could even drive a bigger wedge within the relationship, which is not great for the relationship, but it's a natural result of these things happening. And on top of resentment, you may see guilt, and you may see an impact on kids. Guilt in terms of you feel bad for this person, or you are the person struggling with mental health and you feel bad for yourself, you feel bad for others. On top of that, if you have any kids in the household, you see an impact. If one of the parents isn't doing as well, that can cause a strain within that relationship. So the third piece is gonna be how to fix it. And the first recommendation I have for you is to go and get professional help. I am not a therapist, I am not licensed in that area, but with that being said, I can tell you that those therapists can help you work through some of these issues. So that's gonna be the first piece. But another piece on a level in a relationship with yourself is to ask yourself, how can you take better care of yourself? Or how can you encourage the person struggling with this to take better care of themselves? If they're struggling with mental health, I'd imagine that one of their areas of the balance wheel is not very high. Maybe all of them are really low. So I would encourage you, the first thing you could do is fitness. It's the easiest hack to make yourself feel better on a psychological level, but also on an actual physical level. So taking care of that fitness is gonna be the first piece. Now, on top of fitness, another thing that they could be struggling with is purpose, but I think purpose ties directly to professional. So if they're having struggles within their professional world, how can you help them through that, or how can you help yourself through that? Do you have a direction? Do you have purpose? Those things could really affect your mental health, and that's what really affected me in the past. It's part of the reason I struggled so bad with it, is I wasn't fulfilling my purpose. Now, on top of purpose, another thing that can cause some of these mental health issues and people not take care of themselves as well is the resources. Maybe they have a problem with time, maybe have a problem with money. What are some of those areas and some of those things that they're struggling with within the resources category? On top of resources, relationships themselves. Maybe they're really struggling with a relationship, and then it just creates a cyclical cycle of how they can't get out of this thing where they have bad relationships, bad mental health over and over and over again. Maybe it's relationship with family, relationship with partner, relationship with themselves. Whatever it is, that's why I encourage you to take this balance wheel, because it really help lay it out for you and show you the problem. That's gonna be the first piece in helping your mental health, is probably to identify what's going on. Again, not a mental health therapist or any of that stuff, but that's just what I've personally done, is to identify the problem and then work from there. Now, after you've identified the problem, it's time to have open and honest communication with the person or with yourself. Why do you think you have this problem? Why are you potentially avoiding this problem? What's going on there? And having that open and honest dialogue is key to breaking down the problem. Now, once you have that open and honest dialogue and communication, it's then potentially time again to get the professional help. I'm gonna harp on that again, because that's gonna be your key within this, is to get professional help, because those people are trained in this and they can really help make a difference in your lives. If you like this video and you haven't already, take that balance in the description below, because it's really helpful to break this stuff down and identify. On top of that, if you will comment, it's helpful for me to know what you guys like. If you comment, I know exactly what you guys like. On top of that, if you like and subscribe, it's just some icing on the cake.